My name is Idris Warsam, and at 2:14 in the morning on a corner in downtown Minneapolis, I picked up a passenger who knew my children's names before I told him. He knew what I had whispered to Allah 3 nights earlier, alone, on my knees, in the cold of my garage. And by the time he stepped out of my car, I did not know what I believed anymore. I still don't have all the words for what happened that night. I only know it happened, and I know I have not been the same man since. I need to take you back further than that night, though, because you won't understand why it hit me the way it did unless you understand what I was carrying into that car. I was born in Mogadishu in 1983. I don't remember much of Somalia before the war, just fragments. The smell of my grandmother's tea, the sound of the call to prayer rolling over the rooftops 5 times a day, so constant you stopped noticing it, the way you stopped noticing your own heartbeat. My father sold auto parts near the port. My mother taught small children the Quran in the front room of our house, sitting cross-legged on a mat while a dozen kids repeated verses back to her in a sing-song rhythm I can still hear if I close my eyes. Then the fighting came. I was 7 when the first mortar shell landed close enough to shatter every window on our street. I remember my mother pulling me under the kitchen table, her whole body wrapped around mine. And I remember thinking in the strange logic of a child that if she was scared, the world itself must be ending. My father made a decision that saved our lives and broke something in him at the same time. We left everything. The house, the auto parts shop, my grandmother's grave, all of it, in the space of one night. Kenya came next, a refugee camp outside Nairobi, a place called Dadaab. Though back then it was just rows of tents and the smell of dust and the sound of too many families crowded too close together. We were there almost 4 years. I learned to read in that camp from a volunteer teacher who taught lessons under a tarp strung between 2 poles. I learned what it meant to wait for something without knowing if it was coming. My father used to say waiting was its own kind of faith, that every day you woke up and asked Allah for one more day of patience, you were praying whether you called it that or not. Then finally, a sponsorship came through, and we landed in Minneapolis, Minnesota, a city so cold in January that I remember crying the first time I touched snow, not because it was beautiful, but because I did not understand how anyone survived it. My father worked 2 jobs the first 3 years, a parking garage attendant by day and a security guard by night, and I remember him falling asleep sitting upright at the dinner table more times than I can count. We survived it. Minneapolis has one of the largest Somali communities in the entire country, and by the time I was in high school, Cedar Riverside felt as much like home as anywhere ever had. There were mosques within walking distance, halal butchers who knew your family by name, elders who sat outside the community center on folding chairs all summer, arguing about politics back home and politics in America with equal passion. I grew up praying 5 times a day because my mother would not let me skip it, not because I chose it for myself. That distinction matters. Hold on to it. I am 42 years old now. I have a wife, Amina, who has put up with more from me than any woman should have to. We have 3 children. Yusuf is 17, quiet, brilliant with numbers, obsessed with the idea of becoming an engineer even though we have never once been able to afford to send him anywhere near a 4-year university. Hodan is 13, sharp-tongued, better at math than I ever was, always drawing in the margins of her homework. And Zachariah is 8, and he still thinks his father is the strongest man in the world, which is a kind of faith I did not deserve on the night I'm about to tell you about. For the last 6 years I have driven nights for a rideshare app. Before that I drove a cab, and before that I worked the line at a meatpacking plant in South St. Paul until my back gave out. Driving suited me in a strange way. I liked the empty freeways after midnight. I liked watching the city breathe differently at 3 a.m. than it does at 3 p.m. I had seen almost everything a person can see from a driver's seat. Drunk executives crying about their marriages. Teenagers making out in my back seat like I was invisible. A mother once, hysterical, holding a feverish baby, begging me to run every red light between Uptown and the Children's Hospital. I did. I have seen the whole ugly, tender mess of human life pass through my back seat, and I thought, after 6 years, that nothing could surprise me anymore. I was wrong. That week had been brutal. I had logged almost 50 hours behind the wheel and cleared barely enough to cover gas and the insurance payment. Amina had gotten 3 texts that day from our landlord, a man named Pemberton who ran 4 properties in our part of South Minneapolis and had exactly 0 patients left for late rent. We owed $2,800. He had already told us in writing that if we didn't pay within the week, he would begin the eviction process. I remember sitting in my car outside a gas station on Lake Street, staring at the number in my banking app, feeling something close to physical pain in my chest. It wasn't only the money. Money problems have a way of digging tunnels into every other part of a marriage, and mine was no exception. Amina and I had started snapping at each other over small things, dishes left in the sink, a forgotten grocery list, the volume of the television. Underneath every one of those small fights sat the same unspoken fear neither of us wanted to say out loud, that we might lose the house our children had grown up in. Zachariah had started asking, in the innocent, devastating way 8-year-olds ask things, whether we were poor. I didn't have a good answer for him. I had also stopped feeling anything when I prayed. That's a hard thing to admit on camera, harder than the money, honestly. I would lay out my mat, face toward Mecca, go through every motion my mother taught me 40 years earlier, and feel like I was reciting a phone number instead of speaking to my Creator. I told myself it was exhaustion. Some nights I told myself it was nothing at all, that faith was simply a habit you kept for your children's sake, the way you keep a family recipe alive even after you've stopped tasting anything special in it. The week before all of this, I'd started having the same dream twice, which had never happened to me before in my life. In the dream, I was driving an empty car down Franklin Avenue, no passenger in the back seat, and every streetlight I passed flickered white instead of orange, one after another all the way to the horizon. I woke up both times with my heart pounding, unable to explain to Amina why a dream about streetlights had left me so shaken, so I didn't try. 3 nights before that ride, unable to sleep, I had gone out to our garage, away from Amina, away from the kids, and knelt on the cold concrete floor between my toolbox and Yusuf's old bicycle. I don't fully know why the garage, except that it was the one room in the house where nobody would see me if I broke down. And I did break down. I told Allah I was tired. I asked him why I worked so hard and still couldn't protect my own family. I asked plainly for a sign, anything, to tell me it was going to be okay. Then I wiped my face, turned off the light, and went back to bed, embarrassed at myself for expecting an answer. One more ride, I told myself. One more ride and I go home. Looking back now, I think the night had already started sending me signals before that final ride, and I was too tired and too numb to notice them. Around midnight, I'd picked up an elderly white woman from a hospital in St. Paul, heading home after visiting her dying husband. She held my hand through the open partition for a moment when she got out, unprompted, and said, "You're going to be all right, young man. Somebody's watching out for you." I remember thinking it was a strange thing for a total stranger to say to me, and I remember dismissing it within minutes, filing it away the way you file away most things a stranger says to you in the dark. Then around 1:30, while I was stopped at a red light on Riverside, I glanced up and could have sworn I saw a man in white clothing standing on the far corner, watching traffic. When the light turned green and I looked again, there was no one there. I told myself I was seeing things. 50 hours behind the wheel does that to a person. That's when the app pinged. Pickup requested. A corner near the Franklin Avenue light rail station. It struck me as an odd spot for that hour. Nobody waits for a ride share on a dark corner near the tracks at 2 in the morning unless something's gone wrong. But odd pickups paid the same as easy ones, so I didn't think twice. I turned off Riverside and cut across toward Franklin, past the shuttered Somali restaurants and the halal grocery with its metal gate pulled down, past the mosque where I hadn't set foot in longer than I wanted to admit. When I reached the corner, I didn't see anyone at first. I actually reached for my phone to mark the rider as a no-show. Then I saw him standing in the orange wash of the streetlight on the far side of the block, waiting like he had nowhere else to be and all the time in the world to be there. He wore a plain white robe. Not a costume, not anything flashy, just simple white cloth. The kind you might picture if someone described a man from the Bible to you and you'd never actually read one. Long dark hair past his shoulders, a short, neat beard. My first thought, God forgive me, was that some drama student had wandered too far from campus in a costume from a play. My second thought was that Minneapolis has its share of people talking to themselves on a winter night, and maybe I should just drive off. He walked toward the car instead, unhurried, the way you walk when you already know exactly how the next hour of your life is going to go. The temperature outside had dropped into the 30s that night, the kind of late autumn Minnesota cold that turns your breath into fog and makes the streetlights look like they're wearing halos. He wore no coat. I remember noticing that and filing it away as one more strange detail in a night that was already collecting them. I rolled the window down halfway. "You call the ride?" He nodded, said nothing yet, and opened the back door. The second that door opened, something changed in the air inside my car. I want to be precise about this because I've turned it over in my head 1,000 times since. The temperature inside seemed to shift, not colder from the open door the way you'd expect on a 30-degree night, but warmer, like the heater had kicked on even though I hadn't touched it. There was a faint scent too, something I couldn't place at first and still struggled to name honestly. Not cologne, not the stale fast food smell that clings to most rideshare interiors by 2 in the morning. Something closer to the smell of rain on warm pavement, clean and heavy at once, though it hadn't rained in Minneapolis in 9 days. Mostly, though, it wasn't a smell or a sound at all. It was more like walking into an empty room and realizing, before you can explain how you know it, that you are not actually alone in it. My hands actually tightened on the wheel before he'd said a single word, my whole body reacting to something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. "Good evening, Idris," he said, settling into the seat. I froze. My display name on the app is a set of initials. IW, nothing more. For exactly this reason. For safety. For privacy. I checked the screen out of pure reflex. Initials only. No name. "How do you know my name?" I asked, adjusting the mirror so I could see him better. "We haven't met before," he said, "but I know you've had a hard week." I told myself that's a line any stranger could throw at a rideshare driver at 2 in the morning and probably land. Everybody's had a hard week. I asked him where he needed to go, mostly to change the subject in my own head. The app had a destination listed, an address downtown near the river. He confirmed it, and I pulled out into the empty street. For the first few blocks I drove in silence, glancing at him in the mirror more than I wanted to admit. There was nothing threatening about him. If anything, the opposite. He sat with a kind of stillness I associated with old men who had survived war and come out the other side without bitterness, which is a rarer thing than people think. But his eyes unsettled me. They didn't dart around the city the way a stranger's eyes usually do. They stayed on me. "You have 3 children," he said, breaking the silence. I hit the brake harder than I meant to at a stop sign that didn't need it. "Yusuf wants to study engineering," he continued, like he was simply confirming a fact, not revealing one. "But you and Amina don't believe you'll ever be able to afford it. Hodan draws in the margins of her math homework instead of doing the problems, and it drives you crazy even though you know she's talented. And Zachariah still thinks his father hung the moon." I pulled the car fully to the curb this time, in a stretch of empty street lined with shuttered storefronts. I turned around in my seat to look at him directly. "Who are you?" I said, and it wasn't really a question anymore, it was closer to a demand. "Someone who cares about you and your family," he said. "That's not an answer." He held my gaze, patient, unbothered by my raised voice. "Keep driving, Idris. I'll explain." I don't know why I obeyed him. I've asked myself that question more than any other question in this whole story. I am not a man who takes orders easily, and I certainly don't take them from strangers in the back of my own car. But something in the way he said it made arguing feel almost beside the point, like resisting the temperature of a room. I pulled back into the street. "You haven't been sleeping," he said. "You wake up at 4 in the morning thinking about the rent. Amina has noticed you've lost weight. You barely play with Zachariah anymore. Not because you don't love him, but because you don't have anything left in you by the time you get home." My hands had started to shake on the wheel, just slightly. The kind of shake you can hide from a passenger but not from yourself. 3 nights ago, he continued, quieter now. You went out to the garage after everyone was asleep. You knelt down on the cold concrete floor, and you prayed. You told Allah you were tired. You told him you didn't understand why you worked so hard and still couldn't protect your own family. You asked for a sign. You said you needed something, anything, to tell you it was going to be okay. I had to pull over again. This time I didn't turn around. I just sat there, both hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead through the windshield at nothing. Nobody saw me, I said, and my voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. Nobody was there. I was there, he said. I heard you. That's not possible. Why not? Because you would have to be. I stopped myself. I couldn't finish the sentence because the only ending that made any sense terrified me more than anything else that had happened in that car so far. He let the silence sit there for a moment, the way you let a wound breathe before you touch it. Then he said it plainly, without drama, the way you'd tell someone your own name at a bus stop. Pull over up ahead, he said gently, before I could respond. By the gas station on the corner. You need to hear this without your eyes on the road. I don't fully know why I did it, except that arguing with him felt again like arguing with the temperature of a room. I pulled into the empty lot of a shuttered gas station, the pumps dark, the convenience store windows covered in metal grates for the night, one flickering overhead light buzzing above the empty parking spaces. I put the car in park and turned fully around in my seat. All right, I said, my voice not quite steady. I'm listening. In the light from that single buzzing fixture, I could see his face clearly for the first time all night. It wasn't a face that stood out, not handsome in the way a movie would cast it, not striking in any way you could point to and describe to a sketch artist. And yet it was a face I knew, the second I really looked at it, that I would never be able to fully forget. The way you never forget the face of someone who looked at you and actually saw you all the way down without flinching. My name is Isa, he said, but you may also know me as Jesus. I actually laughed. It came out sharp and nervous, not a real laugh. Isa, I repeated. Prophet Isa, right. Sure, and I'm the Emir of Minneapolis. I turned around fully to look at him. Look, man, I don't know what kind of joke this is, or what you're trying to sell me, but I grew up hearing about Isa in the Quran my whole life. He was a prophet, a great one. He healed the sick, he spoke as a baby in the cradle, he'll return before the end of days, we believe all of that. But he's not sitting in the back of a rideshare car in Minneapolis at 2 a.m. telling a broke Somali driver his kids' names. What if I told you I'm more than what you were taught I was? He said, and there was no offense in his voice, only a kind of gentle patience, like a father repeating something to a child who wasn't ready to hear it the first time. I tell you that's not something you get to just claim, I said. That's not how faith works. I'm not asking you to believe a claim, he said. I'm asking you to look at what's already happened tonight and decide what it means. I didn't have an answer for that. I put the car back in drive because I genuinely did not know what else to do with my body in that moment, and we continued in silence toward the river. If you've made it this far with me, I want to ask you something, and I mean it honestly, not as some kind of script. Where are you right now, watching this? What time is it where you are? I think about the fact that somebody in a completely different time zone, a completely different life, is hearing this story at the exact moment they needed to hear it. If that's you tonight, just know it. Drop your city in the comments below. I read every single one. We were maybe 10 minutes from downtown when he spoke again. You've been angry at Allah, he said. It wasn't cruel the way he said it. It was almost tender, the way you'd name a wound someone had been hiding. I have not, I said too fast, the way you deny something you know is true the second it leaves your mouth. You believe he's distant? Isa said. You pray 5 times a day because your mother raised you to, and because you're afraid of what it would mean if you stopped, not because you feel him close to you when you do it. You've felt that way for years. Since before the rent, since before the kids. You've felt like the sky above you is empty. My jaw tightened. I wanted to argue, and the worst part was that I couldn't. because every word of it was true, and I had never said any of it out loud to another living person, not even to Amina. "I don't know what you want from me," I said. "I don't want anything from you," he said. "I came because you asked for a sign and because your heart has been closed off for a long time, and I love you too much to leave it that way." "You keep saying love like it settles something," I said. "In everything I was ever taught, submission comes first. You submit to Allah's will, and love follows from that, not the other way around." "I'm not asking you to reverse the order," Isa said. "I'm asking you to notice that submission without love hollows a person out. You've been submitting for years, Idris, going through the motions your mother taught you. And it's left you feeling like the sky is empty, because motion without love always does in any religion, in any tradition. I didn't come to erase what you were taught. I came because what you were taught about me was never the whole picture. I sat with that for longer than I wanted to admit. The Quran says you were raised to Allah, not killed on a cross," I said. "That's not a small disagreement. That's the center of the whole story for us." "I know exactly what you were taught," he said, without a trace of defensiveness. "Tonight isn't the night to settle every question your scholars and mine have argued about for 14 centuries. Tonight is the night to decide whether you'll let what's true keep knocking, or whether you'll shut the door because the knock came from an unfamiliar direction." Something about the word love landed differently than I expected. I'd heard plenty of religious language in my life. I know what devotion sounds like, what submission sounds like, what fear of God sounds like. What I hadn't heard, not in years, maybe not ever quite like this, was somebody claiming to know every locked room inside me and saying they wanted in anyway, not to judge what was there, just to be present in it. "My father used to say Allah is closer to us than our jugular vein," I said quietly, almost to myself. "I used to believe that when I was a kid." "He is close," Isa said. "Closer than you think. Closer than you've let yourself feel in a long time." I didn't respond. I just drove, watching the skyline of downtown Minneapolis rise up ahead of us, the lit windows of buildings where other people's lives were happening without any idea what was unfolding in a rideshare car 10 stories below them. "Your son's scholarship letter comes on Thursday," Isa said out of nowhere. I nearly swerved. "What scholarship letter? He hasn't heard back from anywhere." "He will, on Thursday. It's good news. His essay about honest work moved the committee more than he realizes." "He didn't write an essay about honest work," I said. "He wrote about—" And then I stopped because I actually didn't know what Yusuf had written about. He'd been secretive about his application essays, embarrassed, the way teenagers get when they're trying something they're scared of failing at. "Ask him," Isa said simply. "You'll see." We arrived at the address downtown, a modern apartment building with a glass lobby glowing pale blue in the dark. Isa didn't move to get out right away. He just looked at me in the mirror. "I know things feel impossible right now," he said. "The rent, the fear, the distance you feel from God. But none of that is the whole story of your life, Idris. Not even close." "Then what is the whole story?" I asked, and I heard something crack in my own voice that I hadn't given it permission to do. "That you're a good man who has been carrying too much for too long, and it's time to put some of it down." He opened the door and stepped out onto the sidewalk. Before he closed it, he leaned back down and looked at me one more time. "You'll see me again," he said. "Sooner than you think." Then he shut the door and walked toward the building, his white robe catching the wind off the river, and by the time I'd unlocked my phone to end the trip on the app, he was already gone. Not around a corner, not through a door. Gone. The way a thought leaves your head, there and then simply not there. I sat in that car for 20 minutes before I could make myself drive home. I didn't tell Amina everything that first night. I told her I'd had a strange ride, a guy who said some things that shook me, and I said I needed to sleep on it before I could explain any further. She looked at me the way she looks at me when she knows I'm hiding something but decides not to push. 17 years of marriage teaches you when to push and when to let a man sit with something on his own. I didn't sleep. I lay awake running the whole ride back through my head trying to find the trick in it, the explanation that would let me file it away as some elaborate hoax or some very specific coincidence. I couldn't find one. Nobody could have known about the garage. Nobody could have known what I whispered on that concrete floor, alone, at 1 in the morning, with the door shut and my breath fogging in the cold. I hadn't told a soul. Thursday came 4 days later. Yusuf got home from school and dropped his backpack by the door the way he always does, and I almost didn't say anything, almost let the day pass like any other, because some small coward part of me was scared of being wrong, scared of what it would mean about my own sanity if nothing arrived. Then the mail truck pulled up outside. I don't think I've ever watched a mail carrier walk up a driveway with that much attention in my life. There was a large envelope, official, with the University of Minnesota's seal in the corner. Yusuf's hands were actually shaking when he opened it. Amina and Hodan and little Zachariah crowded around him in the living room, and I stood back by the kitchen doorway, watching, my heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the news itself and everything to do with what it meant if the news was real. He'd gotten a full tuition engineering scholarship. Full tuition. Money we had told ourselves for years we would never see a path toward. Hodan started jumping in place, shrieking in a way she hasn't done since she was 6. And Zachariah, not fully understanding what a scholarship even was, just started jumping because his sister was jumping, laughing without a real reason beyond the joy already filling the room. "Read us the letter," Amina said, crying already, and Yusuf read through the formal language until he reached the part about his application essay. "Your essay, what my father taught me about honest work," he read aloud, his voice cracking, "stood out to our committee for its maturity, its humility, and its clear-eyed portrait of dignity under financial strain." I had to leave the room. I went out to the garage, the same cold concrete, and I stood there with my hand over my mouth, shaking, because Isa had told me the exact words 4 days before they happened. He'd told me an essay title I didn't know existed, about a subject my own son had never once discussed with me. There was no version of coincidence wide enough to hold that. That night, after the kids were in bed, I finally told Amina everything. All of it. The white robe, the name he gave, the things he knew that no living person could have known. I sat on the edge of the bed with my hands pressed together between my knees, watching her face the whole time, bracing for the moment she'd tell me to see a doctor or a sheikh or both. She didn't say anything for a long time after I finished. She just looked at me, studying my face the way she does when she's trying to decide if I'm telling a joke that's gone too far. Finally, she asked quietly, "Did he say anything else? Anything you haven't told me?" "He said Yusuf's scholarship letter comes Thursday," I said. "He said it's good news." Amina laughed. But it wasn't a laugh with any doubt in it. It was the laugh of someone standing at the edge of something too big to hold steady. "Idris," she said, "you understand how that sounds." "I know how it sounds," I said. "I've been trying to explain it away in my head for 2 days straight, and I can't." She was quiet again, and then she said something that undid me completely. "I've been praying too," she said. "Every night, for months, not just this week. I've been asking Allah to send you something, because I didn't know how else to reach you. You felt so far away, Idris, even when you're sitting right next to me. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to feel like I doubted you as a husband or as a provider. I put my head in my hands. I felt far away because I felt like I was failing all of you," I said. "Every night I couldn't cover the bills felt like proof I wasn't the man you married." "I never once thought that," she said, taking my hands away from my face and holding them in hers. "I thought you were exhausted. I thought you needed rest, not proof you were failing." We sat together in that quiet for a long time after that. Two people raised in a faith that reveres Isa as a prophet, trying to make sense of a night where he'd shown up claiming to be something more. Neither of us slept much. At one point, near 2 in the morning, Amina turned to me and asked the question I'd been avoiding asking myself. "What if it's true?" she said. "Not just that he knew things. What if it's true, all of it, the way the Christians believe it?" "I don't know," I told her honestly. "But I know I'm not the same man I was 3 days ago, and I don't think I want to go back to being him." I want to pause the story here, because I know some of you watching are going through your own version of what I was going through that week. Maybe it's not rent. Maybe it's a diagnosis or a marriage falling apart or a kid you're scared for. If that's you, I want you to do one thing before we go further into this story. Hit subscribe and leave a single word in the comments describing what you need a sign about right now. I go through those comments and I pray over everyone I read. Something shifted in me after that. I don't want to make it sound like I fell to my knees and declared myself a follower of Jesus that same week, because that isn't honest, and this whole account only matters if I tell it honestly. What actually happened was slower and stranger than that. I started thinking about Isa differently. I started reading quietly at night after Amina and the kids were asleep, searching for what the Injil, what Christians call the gospel, actually said about him, comparing it against what I'd been taught my whole life. 2 weeks after that first ride, something else happened that I still can't fully explain except to say it felt connected. A man from our mosque community, Abdurrahman, who ran a small medical supply distribution company out of Bloomington, stopped me in the parking lot after Friday prayer. I hadn't spoken to him in months. He said his regular driver had quit without notice, and he needed someone reliable, full-time, with benefits, someone who knew the Twin Cities inside and out. He'd heard through a cousin that I drove nights and figured I might know someone to recommend. I told him I'd take the job myself. He looked surprised, then pleased, and within a week I had a salary nearly double what I'd been clearing on the app, with health insurance for the first time in 6 years. I still drove some nights, not out of desperation anymore, but because something in me had started to feel like those late hours on the road weren't wasted time. They felt like they mattered in a way I couldn't yet explain. We paid off Pemberton. We caught up on rent with 2 weeks to spare before his deadline. Amina cried when she saw the balance clear. The change wasn't only financial, though the money made everything else easier to notice. Amina told me, weeks later, that she'd started to see it in small things first. I stopped snapping at Zachariah when he interrupted my sleep on weekend mornings. I started actually sitting through Hoden's long explanations of whatever math competition she was training for instead of nodding along while checking my phone. Amina said I looked at her differently too, though she struggled to explain exactly how. Something about the way I'd hold her gaze a beat longer than I used to, like I was actually present in the room instead of half somewhere else worrying about numbers on a bank statement. During those weeks, I also did something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. I went and sat down with Sheikh Abdullahi, an older imam at our mosque who had known my father before he passed. I didn't tell him everything, not the ride, not the name Isa had given himself. I only told him I'd been struggling, that I felt pulled toward Isa in a way I couldn't explain, and that I needed to understand my own tradition's teaching on him better before I let myself think anything further. He was patient with me the way older men who have buried a lot of friends tend to be patient. He walked me through what the Quran says, that Isa was born of Maryam without a father, that he spoke as an infant in her defense, that he healed the blind and the leper by Allah's permission, that he will return before the day of judgment to defeat falsehood. We honor him more than most people realize, Sheikh Abdullahi told me. We simply do not believe he is God himself. That is where our path and the Christian path divide. I asked him carefully what he thought it would mean if a person felt Isa had spoken to them directly, personally, in a way that felt undeniable. He considered the question longer than I expected. Allah can reach a heart through many doors, he finally said. I would not be quick to tell a man he imagined mercy. I would tell him to test what he felt against how it changes his character. Does it make him more patient with his wife? More generous to strangers? More honest in his work? If those things grow in him, something true happened, whatever name you want to put on it. If those things do not grow, be suspicious of what you felt. I left his office without full peace, but with a measuring stick I could actually use. In the weeks that followed, I started asking myself that same question every single day. Was I more patient with Amina? Was I more generous with strangers? The honest answer every single time was yes. Something in me had grown gentler since that ride, not harder, not stranger, gentler. And I decided that had to mean something, even if I couldn't yet put a name to what. I also spent nights after everyone was asleep reading through the Injil on an old laptop at the kitchen table, comparing it line by line against what I'd grown up believing. I won't pretend I resolved every tension. I didn't, and I still haven't, fully. But somewhere in those quiet hours, reading about a man who touched lepers nobody else would touch and forgave people nobody else would forgive, I stopped feeling like I was betraying my father's memory by paying attention. I started feeling like I was finally listening to something I'd been taught to respect my whole life, just from a distance too far to actually hear it clearly. I started noticing things on my night rides after that, things I would have driven straight past 6 weeks earlier without a second thought. There was a woman I picked up from the airport, red-eyed, silent, who I later learned was flying home from her father's funeral in another state. I didn't say much. I just told her I was sorry for her loss and let her cry in the back seat without making her feel watched. When we reached her house, she thanked me in a voice that suggested nobody had been gentle with her in days. There was a man, clearly drunk, who got in near a bar in Uptown and started talking to himself about his marriage falling apart. I didn't lecture him. I just listened, the way you listen to a man who has nobody else left listening. When he got out, he thanked me for not judging him, and I told him everybody goes through nights like this one, and it doesn't have to be the end of his story. And then there was Sadia. She called for a pickup near the exact same corner by the Franklin Avenue light rail station, close to 2 a.m, months after that first ride. When I arrived, she was shaking, mascara streaked, barely able to give me her address. Somewhere on Nicollet Island, she told me, her voice cracking. During the drive, she told me she'd just lost her job at a downtown hotel after refusing to do something her manager had pressured her toward, something that made her physically sick to even describe. She was 3 months from finishing her nursing certificate and now had no way to cover the last of her tuition. I almost did something terrible tonight, she admitted quietly, staring out the window. I was on my way to do it when a man stopped me on the street. Older, dressed really plainly. He told me I was worth more than I believed. He gave me the fare for this ride and told me the driver would help me. I nearly ran a red light. What did he look like? I asked, my voice unsteady. She described him. White clothing, long dark hair, eyes that felt like they'd known her a long time even though she'd never met him. I told her about Abdurrahman's company, about how they were always looking for reliable people, about how I would personally vouch for her the next morning. She wept the rest of the ride, but it was a different kind of crying by the time we reached her building, the kind that comes after relief instead of despair. 3 weeks later, she started working the front desk at the medical supply office. She's still there. There was one more ride that autumn I still think about often. An older man, maybe 60, flagged me down outside a VFW hall on a Tuesday night. Clearly a veteran, clearly alone. He didn't say much for the first 15 minutes, just stared out the window at the passing streetlights. Eventually he told me it was the anniversary of his son's death, a soldier who never came home from Afghanistan, and that he came to that hall every year on this date because it was the only place that still said his son's name out loud. I didn't offer him advice. I didn't quote him anything religious. I just told him his son's name mattered to me too now, because he'd told me, and that I'd remember it. His name was Danny. When we reached the man's apartment, he sat in the back seat for a long moment before getting out. "You didn't have to listen to an old man ramble," he said. "I wanted to," I told him, and I meant it. He shook my hand through the window before I drove off, and something about the grip of it, the gratitude in it, reminded me of what Isa had said in my car months before. Every person who gets in is a chance to show love. I hadn't fully believed that the first time I heard it. By the time I dropped Danny off that night, I did. One more ride from that season has stayed with me longer than most. Maybe because of how strange it felt to be on the other side of a conversation I'd had myself not long before. A college kid named Caleb got in near the university, drunk enough to be loose-lipped but not so drunk he didn't know what he was saying. He told me, unprompted, that he'd grown up going to a Lutheran church in Rochester, that his grandmother had been the most devout woman he'd ever known, and that somewhere around his sophomore year, he'd stopped believing any of it was real. "I look around at everything wrong with the world," he said, staring out the window. And I don't see how a God who's supposed to love us lets any of it happen. I thought about telling him nothing, letting him talk himself out on his own the way most drunk passengers do. Instead, I found myself telling him a shortened version of my own story. Not all of it, not the name Isa gave himself. Just the part about praying on a cold garage floor and feeling like nobody was listening, and then feeling weeks later like maybe somebody had been the entire time. "You're Muslim, though," Caleb said, squinting at me in the mirror like the math didn't add up. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because pain doesn't check anybody's religion before it shows up," I told him. "And neither does whatever answers it." He didn't say much after that, but when he got out at his dorm, he lingered by the door for a second. "I might call my grandmother tomorrow," he said. "Haven't talked to her in a while." I don't know if he did. I like to think he did. 5 months after that first ride, on a night I wasn't even working, I drove out to the Franklin Avenue corner on my own. No passenger, no app running, no reason I could explain to Amina except that something pulled me there. I parked and waited, watching the empty street, feeling foolish the longer I sat there. At 2:14 in the morning exactly, I saw him walking toward the car under the streetlight, the same unhurried steps, the same white robe moving slightly in the wind off the river. He got into the passenger seat this time, not the back. "You came back," I said. "I told you that you'd see me again," he said, smiling. We sat there for a long while, not really needing to fill the silence with words. Finally, I asked him the question that had been sitting in my chest for 5 months. "I talked to my imam," I told him first. "I've been reading the Injil most nights after everyone's asleep. Amina's been praying with me about it too." "I know," he said, smiling. "I've been listening." "Sheikh Abdullahi told me to measure it by what grows in me," I said. "Patience, generosity, honesty. He said if those things grow, something true happened." "And what's your answer?" Isa asked. "They've grown," I admitted. "I'm gentler with my wife than I've been in years. I stop for strangers now instead of driving past them. I don't know what to call what happened to me, but I know I don't want to go back to who I was before it." "That's enough of an answer for tonight," he said. "Are you really who you say you are?" "Isa, but more than a prophet. The way the Christians believe you." He looked at me with a patience that didn't need to convince me of anything. "Would it change how you treat your family if I told you plainly?" "No," I said honestly. "I'd love them the same either way." "Would it change how you treat strangers like Sadia?" "No." "Then hold on to what you already know is true," he said. "You know what you felt that first night. You know what you've felt every night since, driving with your heart open instead of closed. That knowledge is worth more right now than any label I could hand you." I nodded slowly, even though part of me still wanted the label, wanted the certainty. But I understood in that moment that faith doesn't always arrive as an argument you win. Sometimes it arrives as a door you keep walking through, again and again, until one day you look back and realize how far the hallway has taken you. "There's something else," he said, before he opened the door to leave. "Yusuf will have a son one day, years from now. That boy will become a doctor, a good one, because of the stories his grandfather tells him about honest work and about a night on Franklin Avenue that changed everything." I felt tears on my face before I even registered I was crying. "Keep driving these streets with an open heart, Idris," he said, stepping out into the night. "That's all I've ever asked of you." He walked off under the streetlights, and this time I watched the whole distance until he turned a corner and was simply gone, and I sat there afterward for nearly an hour, not moving, just breathing, feeling something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for as long as I could remember. It's been almost 3 years now since that first ride. Yusuf is a sophomore studying mechanical engineering, top of his program, and he spends his summers tutoring younger Somali kids in Cedar Riverside who are scared of failing math the way he used to be. Hodan just won a regional math competition and still draws in the margins of everything, and I've stopped minding. Zachariah is 11 and tells anyone who'll listen that his father drove for Jesus once, which makes people at the mosque raise their eyebrows. And honestly, I've stopped worrying about that too. I finally told Yusuf the full story on the drive to his freshman orientation at the university. Just the two of us in the car. The way I'd told him smaller pieces of it over the years, but never the whole thing start to finish. He was quiet for most of it, watching the highway pass. And when I finished, he didn't say anything for almost a mile. "You believe he's God," Yusuf finally said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a question dressed as a statement, the way 17-year-olds test an idea before committing to it out loud. "I believe he knew things about our family nobody else could have known," I said. "I believe he showed up on the worst week of my life and made it better without asking anything from me. Whatever that makes him, I know it makes him someone worth listening to." "That's not really an answer," Yusuf said, and I laughed because it was exactly the kind of thing I'd say to him. "No," I admitted. "It's not. Some questions I'm still driving toward the answer on. I imagine I will be for a long time." He nodded slowly, and something in his face told me the conversation wasn't finished, just paused, the way a lot of the most important conversations between a father and a son tend to be. A few weeks later, without me asking, he brought it up again on his own, over a plate of pasta in the dining hall during a weekend visit home, telling me he'd been reading a little on his own too, comparing notes the way engineers compare notes, looking for where the numbers lined up and where they didn't. I told him that was exactly the right way to spend a long life, looking honestly, refusing to fake certainty he didn't feel yet. Not everyone in our community has taken it well, I'll be honest with you. Some of the men I grew up praying beside look at me differently now, quieter around me than they used to be, unsure what box to put me in. A few have asked outright whether I've left Islam behind, and I still don't have a clean answer for them, because my own journey doesn't fit neatly into the categories people want to hand me. What I tell them is simple. I tell them I met somebody on Franklin Avenue who knew things about my family that no living person could have known, who gave freely without asking anything back, and that I have spent every day since trying to live like that was real, because it was. Abdirahman still runs the medical supply company, and he still tells people, half joking, that he hired the most reliable driver in Hennepin County the same month that driver started acting like a changed man, though he's never quite pushed me to explain why. Amina and I still pray. We still hold on to the faith of our parents in more ways than we've let go of. But something has changed at the center of it. When I pray now, I don't feel like I'm shouting into an empty sky. I feel like somebody is listening, somebody who already knew my name before I ever spoke it, somebody who rode in the back of my car on the worst week of my life and decided I was worth showing up for. I still drive some nights even though we don't need the extra income anymore. Amina asked me once why I kept doing it. I told her the truth. I feel like there are still people out there on dark corners at 2 a.m. who need to know they haven't been forgotten. And I know, better than almost anyone, what it feels like when the car that pulls up for you turns out to be carrying more than you ever expected. Some nights, driving past Franklin Avenue, I slow down at that same corner without meaning to. Out of habit more than expectation now. I don't need to see him standing there to know he hasn't left. I feel it most nights I'm out there. That same stillness that filled the car the moment he first opened the door. The sense of not being alone, even on the emptiest stretch of freeway at 3 a.m. My father used to tell me Allah was closer than my own jugular vein. I understand that sentence differently now than I did as a boy reciting it back to my mother on a prayer mat. I understand it as something I've actually felt, not just something I've been told. If this story meant something to you tonight, I'd ask you to do 2 things. Subscribe, so more people going through their own 2 a.m. can find their way to this channel. And say a prayer, whatever your tradition, whatever words you have for it, for somebody out there right now who feels like the sky above them is empty. You never know which ride is going to be the one that changes everything. May Jesus walk with you today and in every day that is still ahead of you. Amen.